My name is Evelyn Evans. I'm 38 years old, and for 20 years my mother introduced me the same way at every family event. Last Saturday, at her 65th birthday party, she did it again. 60 guests, the Legion Hall in Cedar Falls. She raised her glass, pulled me toward her church friends, and smiled that smile. And this is my disappointment, the one who never made anything of herself. The laughter started, the way it always did. And then, the double doors opened. An old man in a gray suit walked in, 72 years old. Half the room knew his face from the sign above 139 stores across the Midwest. He scanned the tables like he was looking for someone. He was. But here's what none of them knew. What happened in the next 10 minutes didn't just end my mother's toast. It ended 20 years of a story my family told about me. A story someone in that room had been writing on purpose. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get loud, one story at a time. If you've ever been introduced as somebody's punchline, this one is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to last fall, to the season I stopped auditioning for my own family and started counting what they owed. It started in November, on the first Sunday of the month, when I made the 2-hour drive from Des Moines to Cedar Falls, the way other people make dentist appointments. You go because you're supposed to, you leave a little sore. My alarm goes off at 4:30 every morning, weekdays and most weekends. By 6 I'm usually standing on the floor of a distribution center the size of 4 football fields, deciding which trucks roll where so that 139 farm stores open with stocked shelves. That's my job. That's been some version of my job for 16 years. Nobody in my family knew it. In their version, I worked at the farm store. Singular. A register. A name tag. A little vest. My mother liked that version. It fit the story she'd been telling since I was 18. I drove past the water tower, past the church where Mom has held court in the third pew for 40 years, and pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. White siding. Dad's old garage out back, shut tight since the funeral 6 years ago. I sat in the car for a minute, the way I always did, and watched the kitchen window glow. There are 2 versions of me. One drives a company, one drives home. Only one of them survives dinner. I'd learned that the hard way, and I'd made my peace with it, or told myself I had. I grabbed the pie I'd bought from the good bakery, checked my phone one last time. A freight question from our Nebraska region, answered in 2 lines, and walked up the steps I'd been walking up my whole life. Inside, I could already hear my brother Grant's voice, loud and warm, telling a story where he was the hero. I want you to remember that sound. It matters later. Sunday dinner at my mother's table has assigned roles, same as a church play. Grant, 41, sits at Dad's old spot and performs. That night, it was a story about a major client he'd landed for his insurance business, told with hand gestures. His wife Melissa sat quiet next to him, cutting food for the twins, Tyler and Tess. My mother, Carol, glowed at her son like he'd invented rain. Then the spotlight swung to me, the way it always did, just long enough to dim. Evelyn's still at the farm store, Mom said to no one who'd asked. Some people find their little shelf and stay on it. She patted my hand when she said it. That's the part people don't understand about my mother. The cruelty always came dressed as affection. Halfway through the pie, the doorbell rang. A neighbor, Judy from 2 streets over, returning a casserole dish. Mom walked her into the dining room to show off the family, and there it came, smooth as a hymn she'd sung 1,000 times. You know my son Grant, the financial consultant, and this is my disappointment, the one who never made anything of herself. Judy laughed the uncomfortable laugh of a woman holding an empty dish. Grant grinned into his coffee. Tess looked at me, then at her plate. I said it was nice to see Judy, and I meant it, because none of this was Judy's fault. I used to correct my mother. I'd bring facts to the table like receipts. It never worked, and once it made things worse in a way I'll tell you about. I stopped the year I turned 24. You'll understand why. What I want you to notice is what I noticed that night. Driving home, Judy hadn't asked what I did. Nobody ever asked. The introduction always answered first. Monday morning, 5:55, I badged into the Des Moines Distribution Center while the sky was still the color of wet concrete. By 6:15, I'd rerouted 2 trucks around a bridge closure on Route 20, approved an emergency generator rental for our store in Storm Lake, and talked a warehouse shift lead out of quitting over a schedule dispute. 300 people report up to me, one way or another. My title, on paper, is Vice President of Operations for Hartwell Farm and Ranch Supply. Privately held. 139 stores across 6 states. Around $380 million in revenue last year, though we don't say that number out loud much. I started at 22 as a cashier in store number 14 because it was the only job that called me back. Bookkeeper at 24, store manager at 28, regional at 31, VP at 35. Nobody handed me a rung of that ladder. I counted my way up it. That morning, Walter Hartwell came through the warehouse the way he still did most Mondays, 72 years old, walking the aisles of his own life. He founded the company 45 years ago out of a single feed store. His wife is gone. His only son died young, and he doesn't speak of it. He stopped at my clipboard, looked over the reroute, and said, "You're the quietest fix I ever hired." From Walter, that's a parade. So that's the truth of me, the version with documents behind it. My family didn't know any of it. For a long time I thought that was my fault. My silence. My choice. That part was my fault. At first. It took me most of this story to learn that my silence had a business partner. Somebody had been filling the space I left empty, and they hadn't been filling it with nothing. They'd been filling it with a version of me built to fail. Here's why I stopped bringing news home. The year I turned 24, Hartwell promoted me to bookkeeper. First salaried job of my life. Benefits. A desk. I was proud the way you're only proud the first time, and I made the mistake of saying so at Christmas dinner. My mother set down her fork, looked around the table, and said, "They gave her the calculator because she can't talk to customers." The room laughed. Grant laughed hardest and added, "Better count fast, Evie, before they count you out." I sat there with my big announcement dying on the tablecloth, and I watched my good news get melted down and recast as a joke in under a minute. That was the education. Every fact I brought into that house came out the other side as ammunition. My raise became, "They must be desperate." My first apartment became, "Throwing money away on rent." So I ran a quiet experiment, the kind you run when you count things for a living. I stopped reporting. No promotions, no salary, no square footage. If my family's opinion of me was built on information I provided, then starving the supply should have frozen the story where it stood. A bookkeeper at the farm store? Fine. I could live inside that picture frame at dinner once a month and live my actual life the other 29 days. For a few years, I thought the experiment worked. The story did freeze. And then, slowly, it started moving again. On its own. Downhill. By the time I was 30, the family version of Evelyn wasn't just modest. She was struggling. Barely hanging on. Passed over. Lucky they kept her. I hadn't fed the story a crumb in 6 years, and somehow it had gotten fatter, meaner, and more specific. So I stopped bringing news. Someone else, it turned out, kept delivering it anyway. Their version of it. Every family has one safe person. Mine was my cousin Rachel. Rachel Dunn, 36, my Aunt Louise's daughter, 2 years behind me in school, and 40 years ahead of everyone else in that family in the art of listening. She lived across town in Des Moines, and we had a standing coffee date. First Saturday of the month, a little brick cafe on Ingersoll where the barista knew our orders. Rachel got the real version of my life, the only person who did. When I made regional at 31, Rachel was the one who clinked her mug against mine. When I bought my house at 34, a little craftsman with a porch swing, paid in full trajectory, none of their business, Rachel toasted me with a cinnamon roll. When my mother's introductions got their own permanent shape, my disappointment, said like a job title, Rachel was the one who said, "She's wrong about you, Evie. Someday everyone's going to know it." I held on to that sentence for years. She always knew the right thing to say, and I mistook that for love, when I should have recognized it as skill. Looking back, there were tells. Rachel asked questions with edges on them. A promotion like that? The money must be real now, huh? What did the house run you, if you don't mind me asking? At the time, it sounded like a cheerleader wanting details. Cheerleaders do want details. So do scouts. I told her almost everything. The title, the neighborhood, the fact that I'd stopped correcting Mom because correcting her cost more than it paid. Rachel nodded along with those warm brown eyes and told me I deserved better, and I drove home feeling lighter every single time. I want to be fair to the woman I was then. I wasn't careless. I'd locked every door I had. It just never occurred to me that I'd handed someone a key. The first crack showed up over pot roast. It was a regular Sunday in early December, the roads freshly salted. Mom was in rare form, working through her catalog of my shortcomings when she landed on something new. "And I don't know why a person rents when she could save," she said, then smiled sweetly. "Though I suppose when you overpay for a little house on the west side, there's nothing left to save." I kept my face still. It's a skill you build in warehouses and worse dinners. But inside, an alarm started ringing, low and steady. I had never told my mother I bought a house. I had never told her the neighborhood. She had the west side right and the price wrong. High, inflated, the number you'd land on if a story had passed through a couple of hands, each one rounding up. There were exactly 2 people on earth who knew what I paid: my closing attorney and Rachel. The next Saturday at the cafe, I set my cup down and asked her straight out, because I'm not a person who lets a ledger sit unbalanced. "Rachel, did you mention my house to anyone? Mom knew things." Rachel didn't flinch. That's the detail I'd replay later. No flinch at all. She laughed. Easy as Sunday. "Evie, you probably said something at Thanksgiving. You know how you get after 2 glasses of wine, and your mom fishes. She's always fished." It was plausible. That's the thing about good lies and good liars. They don't ask you to believe something wild. They hand you the boring explanation and let you carry it home yourself. I carried it. But I also did something else. Something I didn't tell Rachel or anyone. I started keeping track of what my family knew and when they knew it. Quietly. In my head. Where I keep numbers. Every leak has a source. You just have to map the water. A week before Christmas, at yet another dinner, Grant had an announcement of his own, delivered the way he delivered everything, standing up, like the table was a podium. "I just want everyone to know," he said, "that I've finished consolidating all of Mom's accounts. Every statement, every bill, every form. It all comes through me now. Somebody in this family has to take responsibility." His eyes came to rest on me when he said the word somebody, and he let them sit there long enough for everyone to follow. Mom reached over and squeezed his wrist with both hands. "Thank God for my son," she said, and her voice actually shook. I'd be lost. I'd have lost this house years ago without Grant. I looked at my plate and did math, which is what I do instead of screaming. 6 years since Dad died. 6 years of Grant handling everything, a man whose insurance office had moved to a smaller strip mall twice in that same stretch, a man driving a new Tahoe he'd bought the same spring Mom mentioned money being tight. None of it was proof of anything. Plenty of men drive trucks they can't afford. But bookkeepers notice when the outflow doesn't match the lifestyle, and I was noticing. I opened my mouth. I truly don't know what I was about to say. And my phone lit up on the table. The overnight lead at our Waterloo warehouse. A sprinkler line had burst over dry goods, 4 stores worth of inventory sitting underwater. I stood, apologized, and started for the door with the phone already at my ear. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, pitched perfectly to reach me and stay deniable. "See, can't even sit through dinner. Some people just aren't built for family." I fixed the flood from my car in a church parking lot. It took an hour. Nobody at that table ever knew, and if they had known, it would not have mattered. I should tell you about my father because he's in this story more than anyone realizes, including me at the time. Raymond Evans fixed farm equipment for 40 years. Combines, balers, anything with a motor and a deadline. He was a quiet man married to a loud woman, and he survived it the way quiet people do, by having a place to go. His was the garage. When I made store manager at 28, I never told the family. But somehow, one Saturday, I looked up from the register area of my store in Ankeny and saw my father standing near the fence post display in his work jacket, hands in his pockets. He didn't wave. He walked one slow lap around my store, looking at the shelves like a man inspecting a weld, and left. We never spoke about it. Not once. That was the whole conversation, and it was one of the best of my life. 6 years ago, the cancer took him fast, 10 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Near the end, when it was just us in the hospital room and the machine doing most of his breathing, he took my hand and said, "Take care of your mother, even when she makes it hard." Those were nearly his last words to me, and I have kept that promise every year since, in a way nobody at that dinner table ever saw. I'll tell you exactly how in a minute, because it matters. What you need to know for now is this. The person getting credit for taking care of my mother was Grant. The person actually doing it was the disappointment. And in a toolbox in a garage that hadn't been opened in 6 years, my father had left me something that proved he'd known what I was, known what was coming, and known which one of his children could count. Christmas at my mother's house draws a bigger crowd, and a bigger crowd meant a bigger stage. Aunt Louise came up from Cedar Rapids with her husband, Rachel drove in from Des Moines, and assorted cousins filled the folding chairs. Mom did her introductions at the door like a receiving line. When my turn came, she didn't even soften it for the holiday. "You remember my disappointment, still at the farm store." Aunt Louise gave me the pity smile she's been giving me since the 90s. Then, over the turkey, Grant cleared his throat and produced his gift for the gathering. "Hey, I heard something concerning," he said, concern being a suit he wore to parties. "Buddy of mine works corporate adjacent to Hartwell. He says they're gearing up for layoffs, cutting deep in the stores." He looked at me with theatrical gentleness. "You should update your resume, Evie. Just in case. I hope you survive it. I really do." The table made sympathetic noises. Mom pressed her hand to her chest and said, at her age, to the ceiling, to God, to her assembled jury. And here's what it took everything in me to sit on. There were no layoffs. There was no plan for layoffs. 11 days earlier, I had signed the capital budget for 6 new store openings, and I knew our headcount to the person because approving it was literally my signature. Whatever Grant's buddy was, he wasn't real. And the rumor was wrong on purpose. Manufactured, close enough to plausible to be believed, aimed carefully at the one thing the family thought they knew about me. I chewed my green beans and smiled and said, "Thanks, Grant, I'll keep an eye out." Rachel caught my eye across the table with a look of warm sympathy, and I remember feeling grateful for her. "I want you to sit with that," because I had the whole map upside down. The drive home from Christmas is 2 hours, and I spent all of it taking Grant's rumor apart like a bad invoice. In my work, when a number is wrong, it's wrong in one of 2 ways. Sloppy wrong is random. Deliberate wrong has a shape. It's wrong in a direction, wrong toward a purpose. Grant's layoff story had a shape. Think about what it accomplished. It explained, in advance, any future where I lost my job. It seeded the room. It made my silence at dinner look like fear instead of choice. And it kept the family's eyes pointed at my imaginary struggles, which, though I couldn't have told you why yet, seemed to be a thing my brother needed very badly. That was the night the wording in my head changed. I stopped thinking of the family story about me as a misunderstanding and started thinking of it as authored. Misunderstandings drift. This had craftsmanship. Over the next month, at a niece's confirmation and a New Year's gathering, I ran my quiet audit. Mom repeated things about me with details I'd never said aloud in that house. The name of my company's health plan, of all things, mangled but recognizable. A cousin asked gently if I'd gotten written up again, a specific fiction with a specific flavor. Everything false about me had the same fingerprints, close to a truth I'd told someone, twisted a half turn, aimed down. Lies about you always have an author, and the good ones have a supply chain. I run supply chains for a living. I know when a story doesn't add up, and I know something else too. You don't catch a leak by shouting at the water. You catch it by putting dye in the pipe and watching where the color comes out. I wasn't ready to do that yet. I still loved everyone I suspected. But the thought had arrived, and it sat down, and it stayed. In January, the twins turned 9, and Melissa threw them a party at the bowling alley in Cedar Falls. I never miss the twins' birthdays. Whatever their father is, Tyler and Tess are the two purely good things that family has produced in a generation, and I intend to be the aunt who shows up. I brought Tess a microscope and Tyler a tackle box, and I was watching them tear paper when my mother's voice cut through the party noise behind me. She was talking to Melissa's parents, meeting them properly for the first time, doing her receiving line. "You know my son, of course, and this." A hand landed on my shoulder, warm as a brand. "Is my disappointment. The one who never made anything of herself. Every family has one." Melissa's father, a decent man who sells tractors, laughed the way you laugh when a stranger hands you something ugly and you don't know where to put it. I said something about the bumpers being good this year. And then Tess appeared at my elbow with cake frosting on her chin, tugged my sleeve, and asked, in the loud whisper of a 9-year-old, "Aunt Evie, what's a disappointment?" The party kept moving. Somewhere a pin machine reset. I crouched down to her level and said, "It's a word for when something doesn't turn out the way a person expected." Tess considered that with her whole face and said, "Like when you order the wrong thing?" "Exactly like that," I said, and she nodded and ran off, satisfied, because at 9, the world still self-corrects. I stood up and made a decision I'd been circling for months. I wasn't going to perform for these people anymore, and I wasn't going to blow anything up either, not at a bowling alley, not in front of those two kids. But the audit was over. Whatever came next was going to be arithmetic. Now let me tell you how I kept my promise to my father, because this is the part that still stings. My mother's house, the white siding, the third of an acre, the garage, has property taxes of about $4,800 a year. 6 years ago, standing in the kitchen after the funeral, I heard her tell Aunt Louise she didn't know how she'd manage it on Dad's pension, so I managed it. Every September and every March, I paid the installments through the county treasurer's website from my own checking account. Anonymous as far as she knew. Automatic as far as I was concerned. Take care of your mother. Even when she makes it hard. $28,000 and change over 6 years, and I never said a word. Because saying a word in that family converts a gift into a target. Then came a Tuesday in February. I'd taken a rare afternoon off and met Mom for coffee at the church hall. Her turf, her friends, small tables, good acoustics. 3 ladies from her Bible study stopped by ours, and my mother, glowing, waved her hand and said it. "Well, I'm blessed. Grant handles all my taxes, every penny, every year. I'd have lost this house without him. That boy is my rock." The ladies cooed. One of them touched Mom's shoulder and said she should thank the Lord for a son like that. My mother agreed that she should and did, right there, a little public prayer of thanksgiving for Grant. I sat 4 feet away holding a paper cup of weak coffee, the actual rock, the anonymous treasurer, the disappointment, and I smiled and said nothing, because what was there to say that wouldn't sound insane? But a cold, clear question walked into my head that afternoon and never left. If Grant tells her he pays the taxes, then what is happening to her actual money? I did the responsible thing first. I want that on the record. The next Sunday, I found Mom alone in the kitchen and asked, as gently as I know how, "Would you let me look over your bank statement sometime? Not to change anything. Just a second set of eyes. It's what I do all day." She went from 0 to Old Testament in about 4 seconds. "You're questioning your brother?" she said, actually stepping back from me. "Grant has a license. Grant sacrifices for this family. You count screws at a farm store and you think you can audit him? The word audit did a lot of work in that sentence. I said I wasn't questioning anyone, which was a lie, and that I loved her, which wasn't, and I let it go. Monday, on my lunch break, I tried the flank. I called her bank, our hometown bank, the one with the toaster oven lobby, and asked what it would take to be added as a viewer on my mother's accounts, or failing that, whether anything looked off. The woman on the phone was kind and utterly immovable. Privacy law. I wasn't an account holder. I wasn't on file as power of attorney. Without Mom present and consenting, I couldn't see so much as a balance. Is there a POA on file? I asked. Pause. I can't discuss the account, ma'am. Which was itself an answer, if you've listened to as many careful silences as I have, so understand my position that spring. I suspected the water was going somewhere wrong. I had asked the owner of the well and been called disloyal for asking. I had asked the bank and hit a wall built, correctly, out of federal law. The door wasn't just closed. It was locked from the inside, by people I loved, one of whom was being robbed, and the other of whom was, I'd have bet my house, doing the robbing. Before I tell you what I found in my father's garage, if you've ever watched somebody else get credit for the thing you quietly carried, put the word invisible in the comments. I read everyone, and if you're new here, subscribe, because the next part is where my father, 6 years gone, joined the fight. It started with the party planning. Mom had decided her 65th birthday, coming in June, would be the event of the decade. The Legion Hall, 60 guests, catered ham. To fund the spectacle of herself, she wanted the garage cleared out and Dad's old junk sold. Grant was assigned the eulogy of a speech. Melissa was assigned decorations. I was assigned the garage because it was dirty work nobody else wanted and clean up after, because of course. I didn't argue. Honestly, I wanted the garage. It was the last room of my father anywhere on earth. I spent a Saturday in there with the door rolled up and the spring air coming through, sorting socket sets and coffee cans of bolts, breathing in 40 years of oil and metal shavings. Under the workbench, behind a stack of seized carburetors, I found his toolbox. The big Craftsman, red gone, rust-freckled. The one that was just his, and it was locked. No key on the pegboard. No key in the cans. A locked box in an unlocked garage. 6 years untouched. I loaded it into my trunk to deal with at home, and I was closing the hatch when my phone rang. Rachel. Hey, heard you're doing the garage? Find anything good in there? I stood in my parents' driveway with the phone at my ear, and a feeling walked up my spine on small, cold feet. I'd been in that garage 4 hours. I hadn't told a soul. Just rest, I said. It was the second time I ever lied to Rachel, and it already felt like practice. That night, at my kitchen table in Des Moines, I cut the lock with a bolt cutter and opened my father's toolbox. The top tray was wrenches, worn smooth, arranged by size the way he arranged everything. I lifted the tray out. Underneath, where a man keeps the things that are really his, there were no tools at all. There were newspapers, clippings, dozens of them, cut square with his pocket knife, and pressed flat, going back 16 years. The grand opening of the Ankeny store, with a crowd photo, where you can just make out a new store manager in a company polo. Me, 28, mid-laugh. A business page brief from the Courier. Hartwell Farm and Ranch Supply announces regional leadership appointments, E. Evans among them. A ribbon cutting. A trade paper piece on our distribution expansion with my name in the 11th paragraph. My father had been keeping receipts on my life for 16 years. He'd tracked a daughter who told him nothing, through newsprint and distance and my mother's noise, clipping the evidence of me the way other men clip coupons. At the bottom of the box was an envelope. For Evie. When you're ready. His mechanic's handwriting pressed hard into the paper. The letter was 1 page. He wrote that he wasn't good at saying things out loud in that house, and that he figured I'd come to the toolbox eventually because I was the only one who'd bother to clean the garage right. He wrote, I know who you are. I've known for years. Being quiet about a good thing doesn't make it less good. And then, at the end, in darker ink, like he'd come back to the page a second time. One more job for you, Evie. Watch your mother's money. I don't trust where it's headed. You're the only one in this family who counts things. I sat in my kitchen for a long time with the paper in both hands. 6 years. That warning had been sitting in the dark under a wrench tray, waiting for me. My father's last receipt. And it was a warning. Grief does something strange to memory. It files everything under loss and locks the drawer. Dad's letter picked the lock, and I spent the next week rereading 6 years of ordinary moments with new eyes. The month after the funeral, Grant at the kitchen table with a folder of paperwork and a pen already uncapped, telling Mom, "Just some authorizations so I can handle things for you. One signature and you never have to worry." I'd been there. I'd thought it was kind. The next spring, Grant's new Tahoe in the driveway. The same week Mom told me money felt tight, and maybe she'd drop her supplemental insurance. The year after, Grant and Melissa in Florida for 10 days. Melissa posted photos of a rented beach house with a pool. The same season Mom took out what she called a little something against the house for the roof. I drove past that roof every month for 2 years. The same brittle shingles, the same moss stain shaped like Ohio. The roof was never done. One of those things is a coincidence. 2 is a pattern. 3, with a power of attorney sitting quietly on file at a small-town bank, is a business model. Ledgers don't lie, and memory, arranged honestly, doesn't either. The trick is that nobody ever makes you arrange it until it's late. I want to be careful here, because I was careful then. I still had no statements, no numbers, no proof a lawyer would frame. What I had was a dead man's handwriting telling me to watch, and 6 years of watching I'd done without knowing it. It was enough to act on. It was not yet enough to win with. So I did what you do when the numbers are hidden. I kept my voice level, my visits regular, and my eyes open, and I waited for the arithmetic to surface. In families like mine, it always surfaces at an event. While all this was simmering, my actual life kept happening, and my actual life had Walter Hartwell in it. In April, he asked me to lunch, which he did a few times a year. Always the same diner by store number 1, always a booth in the back, always meatloaf. But this lunch bent differently. He talked about turning 72. He talked about his wife, gone 9 years now, and, this was rare, about his son, who died at 26 and who Walter mentions the way you touch a stove you know is hot. Once, quickly. Then he wiped his hands on a paper napkin and said, "A private company dies fastest when it's handed to the wrong hands. I've watched men build for 40 years and lose it in 4. I agreed because it's true, and I've read the case studies he lived through. Then he looked at me over his coffee and asked, "If this company were yours, what's the first thing you'd never change?" Notice the shape of that question. Not what would you change, what would you never? I didn't have to reach for the answer. The Monday walk, I said. The founder walking his own floor. The day leadership stops smelling the warehouse is the day the numbers start lying to them. Walter didn't say anything. He nodded once, slow, the way he nods at a pallet stacked right, and he changed the subject to a supplier dispute in Sioux City. Old men move like winter, slow, and then, all at once. I drove back to the office that afternoon with a feeling I refused to name, because naming it felt like tempting it. I had never once, in 16 years, imagined the company could be mine. That's the truth. I imagined shelves stocked and trucks on time. But somewhere in the back of my head, a door I'd never noticed had opened 1 inch, and spring air was coming through it. The garage got noticed. Of course it did. The next Sunday, Grant stood in the emptied space where 40 years of our father used to be, hands on his hips, doing a slow turn like an appraiser. "You cleared it all?" he asked. "Sold what was sellable," I said. "Consignment for the mower and the compressor. Check goes to Mom." He nodded, too casual, and then came the question he'd walked out there to ask. "What about the old man's toolbox, the big red one?" I looked at my brother, and for one clean second I saw the whole board. He knew the toolbox existed. He didn't know what was in it. And some instinct, the same one that had him seeding layoff rumors, made him want inventory on anything he didn't control. "Anything worth money in there?" he added when I didn't answer fast enough. "Just Dad's junk," I said. "Rusty wrenches. I kept it for sentiment." He held my eyes a beat, then shrugged and started talking about the party, the caterer, the ham. It was the first deliberate lie I ever told my brother, and I want to be honest with you about how it felt. It felt like putting on safety glasses. Not dramatic, just correct, given the work ahead. Because here is what had changed in that garage, though Grant couldn't see it. 2 weeks ago, I was a suspicious sister with no standing and no proof. Now I was my father's appointed auditor, with a written mandate in a dead man's hand, sitting in a fireproof box in Des Moines, next to my own 6 years of receipts. For the first time in this whole story, I knew something Grant didn't. Walk with me a little further, because it wouldn't be the last thing, and the next one was about to fall into my lap at a Tuesday meeting with an old man in a gray suit. Before the Tuesday, though, came the proclamation. Mom called a family dinner in May specifically to unveil the plans for her 65th, and she presented them the way a mayor unveils a bridge. The Legion Hall banquet room, booked. 60 guests. The Bible study, the choir, Pastor Jim and his wife, the neighbors, Aunt Louise's whole branch, Melissa's parents, catered ham and scalloped potatoes from the place in Waverly, a slideshow, a banner, already ordered, Carol, 65 years young. "Grant will give the toast," she announced, touching his shoulder like a queen knighting somebody. "He speaks so well?" Melissa got decorations and the cake run, and then Mom turned to me with the bright, generous smile of a woman handing out the last job in the room. "And Evelyn will handle cleanup after. You're so good at that. It doesn't need any presents." My family laughed gently, the way you laugh at a joke that's been aging 20 years. I said cleanup was fine. I meant it too, which surprised me. Some part of me had stopped attending these dinners as a daughter and started attending them the way you'd attend a deposition, noting, filing, letting the record build itself. 60 guests, her entire audience, the full congregation of the Carol Evans story, all in one room with a microphone. I remember thinking on the drive home that my mother had no idea what she was assembling. A stage that size doesn't care who it's built for. It amplifies whoever's true. 2 days later, Walter's assistant called me and asked, in the studiously bland voice executive assistants use for things that are not bland at all, whether I could come by the main office Tuesday morning. Mr. Hartwell wanted an hour, no agenda attached. I said of course, hung up, and stood at my kitchen window for a while, watching the porch swing move in the wind, letting myself name the feeling at last. The first Saturday of June, Rachel and I had our coffee, and Rachel went fishing. She did it well, I'll give her that. 7 layers of casual. Halfway through her latte, she said, "So, weird thing. Somebody told my mom that Hartwell's founder is stepping down, picking a successor. That's your company, right? You hear anything?" The cafe kept humming. I looked at my cousin, and every alarm I owned went off at once, quietly, like lights coming on in a warehouse row by row. There was no announcement. There was no press. There was no rumor. Because the only people on earth who knew Walter's intentions were Walter, his attorney, and, as of 4 days earlier, in a way I haven't told you about yet, me. Nothing had been signed. And Aunt Louise, who thinks a 401k is a racehorse, had heard about it in Cedar Rapids? No. Information was flowing the other direction. Somebody had been asking questions about my company, and Rachel's version of where the question came from was the tell. "Huh," I said. "First I've heard of it. They don't consult the shelf stalkers." Rachel laughed and studied me over her cup a half-second too long, so I ran the dye test. I'm not proud of it, and I'd do it again. I let my voice drop into confiding, the register I'd used with her for 12 years, and said, "Honestly, don't repeat this, but I might be transferred. Kansas. They're restructuring the region and I don't get a vote. I haven't told Mom. Rachel's face did sympathy beautifully. She squeezed my hand. She said the right thing. She always said the right thing. And we hugged at the door like always. Then I sat in my car and set a timer in my head. Dies in the pipe, I thought. Now we watch the water. It took 8 days. 8 days later, at Sunday dinner, my mother put down the gravy boat and looked at me with fresh disappointment, which for her is a renewable resource. "Well," she said, "I hear you're being shipped off to Kansas. Even your company wants you somewhere else." Fork sounds stopped. Aunt Louise, visiting again, made a sad little cluck. Grant leaned back with his arms crossed and studied me with what he must have believed was a poker face, and my mother kept going. "At your age, starting over in some warehouse in Kansas." And I heard almost none of it, because the roaring in my ears was the sound of 12 years of friendship going through a shredder. Kansas. My word. My fake, planted, no one else on earth word, spoken once, to one person, in a cafe on Ingersoll Avenue, and here it was, 9 days later, coming out of my mother's mouth with gravy steam rising through it. The pipeline was real, and it had a name, and the name was Rachel. I want to tell you, I felt clever. What I felt was poured out. You can suspect a thing for months, and still not be ready for the invoice. Every promotion she'd toasted. The house, my salary, my stopped corrections. 12 years of my actual life, hand-delivered to the 2 people who'd been using it to build the disappointment, and I had paid for the coffee more times than not. "Kansas isn't settled," I said evenly, and changed the subject to the party's seating chart. And my mother let me, because seating charts were her favorite subject. I drove the 2 hours home with the radio off. The leak wasn't a crack in my life. It was a pipeline, and it had been running for years, and the only question left was what Rachel got out of it. That answer would come at the party, along with everything else. But first, the Tuesday. The Tuesday had gone like this. Walter's office is the same one he's had for 40 years. Oak desk, dented file cabinets, a window over the loading dock because he likes to watch trucks. When I walked in, his attorney was there, and on the desk sat a document as thick as a hymnal. Walter didn't do preamble. 16 years I've watched you count what matters, he said. The freight, the people, the days. Never once yourself. He turned the document around so it faced me. Succession agreement. My name in the first paragraph. President and Chief Executive Officer, Hartwell Farm and Ranch Supply, effective upon execution of the stock transfer. I read the page twice, because reading things twice is who I am, and then Walter said, "Now count this company as yours." I'm not going to pretend to you that I was smooth. I asked him why not a search firm? Why not a bigger name? He waved at the window, at the trucks. "Search firms find talkers," he said. "I need an operator. The quietest fix I ever hired." Then came the terms. The signing, 2.5 weeks out, a Friday, 5 o'clock, at his attorney's office in Des Moines. Press release the Monday after, 9 a.m., to the trade papers and every store, and one condition, delivered while he looked out at the dock. "Before Monday I meet your family. I don't hand my life's work to a ghost. Family tells you what a person is made of when nobody's clapping." I told him my mother's 65th birthday party was that Saturday. He said, "Good, then Saturday." From that Tuesday on, I walked through my family's insults carrying a secret the size of $100 million. Sit with the geometry of that week. Friday, 5 p.m., the signature. Saturday, the party. 60 guests, 1 microphone, a mother with an introduction loaded. Monday, 9 a.m., the announcement. 3 days, 3 dominoes, standing in a row my family couldn't see. The audience knows now. They didn't. Remember that. Every time my mother opens her mouth from here forward. You're wondering why I didn't tell them. Fair. Most people would have driven straight to Cedar Falls, kicked the kitchen door open, and served the news like a subpoena. Here's the accounting. 20 years of data said any good news I released into that house came back re-engineered as a weapon within a month. Tell them Tuesday, and by Saturday, Grant has spun it. She's exaggerating. It's a paper title. There's trouble behind it. I heard something concerning. My mother would find a way to be wounded by it publicly, at her own party, in front of her whole congregation, and the story would become what my news did to poor Carol. I'd watched her run that play at other people's weddings. No. The plan was silence, signature, and a press release with my name spelled correctly. Let the trade papers make the introduction my family never would. It was clean. It required nothing from anyone I was related to. It had, I'd tell you if you pressed me, a little poetry to it. My plan was silence. Fate's plan, it turned out, involved a microphone, and Fate's timing was better. The Tuesday before the party, while I was reviewing freight contracts, my phone buzzed with my mother's ringtone. I braced and answered, and got 90 seconds of logistics. Arrive by 4, park and back, and this, verbatim. Wear the apron, the good one, since you'll be clearing tables when the guests go. And Evelyn, don't embarrass us by trying to matter tonight. It's my night. I said. Wouldn't dream of it, Mom. It's your night. And I meant every word, God help me, exactly as spoken. She'd said, trying to matter, to a woman with a signed succession agreement dated the day before her party. I hung up, looked at my kitchen ceiling, and laughed until my eyes watered. The first real laugh that house had given me in 20 years. Then I hung the good apron on the hook by the door. Wednesday before the party, Mom summoned me to help find her birth certificate. Some Medicare form Aunt Louise had scared her about. And that errand cracked the vault. The family lockbox lives in the hall closet, a fireproof cube Dad bought in the 90s. Mom couldn't remember the combination, then remembered it wrong, then remembered it right. And inside, on top of the birth certificate, sat a stack of paper that stopped my breath in my throat. A home equity line of credit. Statement after statement, our hometown bank's letterhead, secured against the white-sided house I grew up in. Balance, $118,000. Below that, a notice. Payment past due, second notice, in the red-bordered font banks save for when they mean it. Below that, IRA distribution summaries. One a year going back 6 years, each one a bucket lowered into my mother's retirement and hauled up empty. I kept my voice in the room where I needed it. Mom, this line of credit. What's this for? She barely looked over. Oh, that's Grant's paperwork. The refinancing. He says it's all normal. It's how the money works now. He has a license, Evelyn. She took her birth certificate and went to make tea. Done with the subject. I stood in the hallway and read like the trained reader I am, eyes only, touching nothing but the edges. Dates. Amounts. Signatures. Hers. Real. Her actual pen. On every page. That's the part that made my stomach drop through the floor. No forgery. Nothing for a prosecutor to bite. Just a trusting widow signing what her rock put in front of her, 6 years running. I did the sum in my head right there by the coat hooks, and the sum was around $210,000. Gone. Plus a mortgage reborn on a house that had been paid off when my father died. My mother wasn't sitting on savings. She was sitting on a sinkhole with Grant's name at the bottom. And the only thing that had kept the county from taking the house already was 6 years of property tax paid by the disappointment. I gave my brother one door. I want that on the record too. Thursday evening, I drove to Grant's office, the strip mall one with his name in vinyl on the glass, and sat down across from his desk without an appointment. I laid it out flat and quiet, like a freight manifest. The HELOC balance, the 6 years of IRA draws, the past due notice, the arithmetic. Here's what happens now, I said. You return what you can on a schedule. The line of credit gets closed. You hand back the power of attorney, and Mom's accounts get a professional, neutral eyes, not family. Do that. And this stays a family matter, and you get to stay her rock. Grant listened with his boots up on the desk, and then he smiled, and I watched my last sliver of hope for him leave the room. Prove it, he said. Those are Mom's signatures on everything. Her money, her choices, her licensed advisor. And who's going to take your word over mine, Evie? He spread his hands, generous, explaining the world to me. You're the family screw-up, remember? 20 years, one story. Mom tells it, Aunt Louise tells it, everybody tells it. Who'd believe you? He walked me to the door like it was a sales call, and as I stepped out into the parking lot, he added, soft. For just the two of us. Careful, Evie. Mom only has one story about you. Don't make me add a chapter. Understand. My brother wasn't reckless that night. He was rational. Inside the world as he knew it, he was completely safe. The paperwork was legal, the witness was discredited, and the discrediting had been his own patient work for years. He'd built the perfect alibi out of my reputation. His whole fortress had one load-bearing wall, that I was nobody, and that wall had about 48 hours left to stand. If you've made it this far, you already know a party is coming. 60 guests, one toast, and a man in a gray suit my family had no idea I knew. Comment the ledger always balances if you think Grant picked the wrong sister to write fiction about, and subscribe, because the reckoning starts at the Legion Hall. First, though, I did the unglamorous thing, because unglamorous things are how you actually win. Friday morning, before the 5 o'clock signing, I paid for an hour with an elder law attorney in Des Moines, a calm woman with reading glasses on a chain, and I gave her the facts without names. She confirmed what I'd feared in the hallway by the coat hooks. Voluntary signatures, a power of attorney freely given, no forged documents. Criminal charges would be a long, ugly road with a trusting widow as the star witness against her own son. She was blunt. Prosecutors hate these. Juries hate them more. But there was a civil path, and it was real. Revoke the power of attorney, today, if my mother was willing. Freeze the accounts, close the line of credit against new draws, a forensic accountant to map every dollar. Her phrase was, follow it, then negotiate it back. Restitution agreement with teeth, signed under the shadow of the lawsuit we'd file if he balked. Every step of it legal, every step of it fatal to Grant's little kingdom, and every single step of it requiring one thing I didn't have: my mother's consent. The law could save my mother, but only if my mother wanted saving, and my mother would have to choose between her rock and her records in front of the whole story she'd been telling about both her children. That was the real battlefield, not a courtroom, a 65-year-old woman's willingness to look at paper. I put the attorney's card in my wallet next to my father's letter. Friday, mid-afternoon, Walter called me himself, no assistant. Tomorrow, he said, your family. Anything I should know walking in? And I stood at my office window and made a decision I want to teach in schools. I told him the truth. All of it. I'd spent 16 years keeping my two lives in separate trucks, and I unloaded both of them onto the desk of the most important business relationship I had, 3 hours before he signed his life's work over to me. I told him about 20 years of my disappointment. I told him about the brother with the license and the mother with the introductions, about the toolbox and the letter and the $118,000 against the White House. I told him the party he was walking into was not going to be a warm meet the family, and if he wanted to postpone or reconsider the whole thing, I'd understand and I'd hold no grudge. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Walter said, my father told me I'd fail at everything but drinking. I built the first store to spite him, and the next 100 because it turned out I was good. Another pause, trucks backing somewhere on his end of the line. Then Saturday, I won't just meet your family, Evelyn. I'll meet my company's first test. He hung up the way old men hang up. No goodbye, just done. I sat down slowly in my chair. You should understand what that phone call changed, because everything at the Legion Hall flows from it. Walter didn't wander into my mother's party by cosmic accident. He walked in with the full map in his pocket, eyes open, on purpose. Because I'd finally trusted somebody with the whole ledger of my life, and it turned out the whole ledger was exactly what he'd been waiting to see. At 5 o'clock, we signed. Rewind to the night before, because Grant hadn't been idle after our chat in his office. Thursday night, while my apron hung by my door and the succession agreement sat unsigned, my brother called a family dinner of his own and produced his masterpiece. Melissa told me every word of it later, which is how I can give it to you straight. He waited until the pie, then put on his concerned face, the one he keeps next to his sales face. I heard from a buddy in HR out there, he said, heavy, reluctant, a man burdened by bad news. Hartwell let Evelyn go this week. The Kansas thing fell through and they just let her go. Nobody say anything at the party, okay? Let's not humiliate her on Mom's night. Aunt Louise had it on the phone tree within the hour. By Friday morning, my unemployment was congregation-wide fact, garnished with prayer. And my mother, Melissa swears this is word for word, pressed her hand to her chest and said, at her age, Lord, give me strength for that girl. Then she went back to the seating chart. Here's where I need you to see the whole board the way I saw it Friday night, sitting in my kitchen with a signed succession agreement in my bag. Speak up now, and it's my word against the family's 20-year archive, with Grant holding 48 hours to spin, muddy, and bury before Monday's press release. Stay silent, and I walk into that party tomorrow as the pitied, jobless disappointment, and I eat it, in an apron, for one more night. I chose the apron. Let him spend his last 2 days as king building my humiliation taller. Every inch he added was altitude for the fall, and my brother thought he was writing my ending. He was actually writing his own. Friday, 4:40 p.m., I sat in the parking lot of the attorney's office downtown and watched the minute hand crawl. I'd worn my good blazer to work for no reason, I'd admitted to myself. At 4:55, I went up. Walter was already there. Early the way farmers and founders are early, with his attorney and a pen he'd owned longer than I'd been alive. There were no speeches. That's the thing nobody tells you about the biggest moments. The paperwork sounds like any other paperwork. Pages turning, a chair creak, the scratch of a fountain pen writing my name into the spine of a 45-year-old company. Stock transfer, executed. Succession agreement, executed. Effective immediately, held in confidence, until the Monday announcement. When the last signature dried, Walter shook my hand across the table, one pump, work glove firm, and said, "Congratulations, Madam President." His attorney smiled at her folder. It was the quietest coronation in the history of Iowa. In the elevator down, Walter finally cracked a smile of his own, and it had mischief in it that took 40 years off his face. "See you tomorrow at the Legion Hall," he said. "I had my girl call your mother's RSVP line, told them a friend of Evelyn's from work might stop in." He watched the numbers count down, savoring it. "Nice lady on the phone," she said, and I'm quoting her now. "Anyone from the farm store is welcome. There's a table near the kitchen." A table near the kitchen. I laughed out loud in that elevator, and Walter laughed too. And for a second, we were just two people who'd been underestimated in the same lifetime. Out on the sidewalk, the June evening was warm and gold. 26 hours until my mother's last toast. I drove home, hung the blazer next to the apron, and slept better than I had in 6 months. Saturday, 3:30. I was at the Legion Hall in jeans and the good apron, setting round tables for 60 under a banner that said, "Carol, 65 years young." The ham was staged. The slideshow was cued. My mother swept the room like a general, moving centerpieces an inch left, an inch back. I was folding napkins into fans per instructions when Rachel arrived early, in heels, carrying nothing. She found me at table 9, and her eyes were wrong, jumpy, working. "Evie," she said, low. "I heard about the job. I'm so sorry. Are you... you seem so..." She searched for the word, and it came out almost like an accusation. "Calm?" And there it was, the crack in the machine. 12 years Rachel had been the pipeline, feeding my private truths to the story factory, and the product had always come back matching her intel. Now the product was off. The woman she knew should be wrecked, jobless, exposed, dreading tonight. Instead, I was folding napkins like a person who knows what 9 a.m. Monday holds. Systems fail loud when their data goes bad. "Balanced books make for steady hands," I said, and handed her a stack of napkins, and watched her try to read a language she suddenly didn't speak. Before she could probe again, Melissa appeared at my elbow, pale, twisting her wedding ring, and pulled me toward the coat alcove. Evelyn, before tonight, there's something about the twins' college money you need to. Melissa, my mother's voice from across the hall, sharp as a slammed drawer. The cake, Melissa. Waverly closes at 5. Melissa flinched like a struck dog, whispered, "Later, I promise," and was gone. And I stood in the alcove with a fistful of napkins and one more loop swinging open. The twins' college money. Even the innocents were on the books now. Guests started arriving at 6. By 6:30, the Legion Hall was full and humming. 60 guests, exactly as ordered. The Bible study ladies in their florals commanded 2 tables by the windows. Pastor Jim and his wife sat up front. Aunt Louise's branch filled a loud corner, and Melissa's parents, the tractor dealer and his wife, sat politely with the twins between them. Tyler in a clip-on tie, Tess with a juice box she was too old for and didn't care. My mother wore royal blue and moved through the room like the room was hers, which, for one more hour, it was. Grant worked the crowd in a sport coat, shaking hands, laughing at the right volume, being the financial consultant, being the rock. I carried out chafing dishes and kept the coffee urns full from my post by the kitchen doors, and I watched the stage assemble itself. A little riser up front, a microphone on a stand, tested twice by Grant, who tapped it and said, "Check, check," like a man who'd waited his whole life for sanctioned amplification. The slideshow warmed up on the pull-down screen. Carol as a bride, Carol with baby Grant, Carol at church picnics. I counted maybe 4 photos I appeared in, all crowd shots. Fine. The record was about to update itself. At 7, dinner. At 7:40, Grant's Toast, a masterwork of its genre, 10 minutes about sacrifice and family and a mother's love, delivered to Mom's glistening eyes while Melissa studied the tablecloth. And notice the doors while all this warmth is happening. The double doors at the front of the hall, propped open to the June evening, where anyone arriving late would enter in full view of every table. Stages don't care who they're built for. At 7:52, my mother stood, lifted her glass, and reached for the microphone. My mother gave a toast the way she did everything, beautifully, for an audience. She thanked Pastor Jim. She thanked the choir for their voices and Judy for the flowers. She toasted Grant. My rock, my right hand, the man who keeps his mother safe. And the room raised their glasses to my brother, who bowed his head in a perfect imitation of humility. She praised the twins. She even praised the ham. And then, with her glass still high, her eyes crossed the room and found me by the kitchen doors, and I watched the old machinery engage. "Evelyn, come up here, honey, don't hide." 60 faces turned. I set down the coffee pot and walked to the front, because you do not brawl at a birthday. And my mother slid her arm around my waist and turned us both to face her congregation. For half a second, I'll admit this to you, some 10-year-old girl still living in my chest thought, maybe tonight, it's different. Then my mother smiled her hostess smile and said it, bright and clear into the microphone, the sentence she'd been polishing for 20 years. And this is my disappointment, the one who never made anything of herself. Every family has one. Mine just never grew out of it. The laughter came, scattered and obedient, the sound of 60 people choosing the comfortable exit. Aunt Louise's table laughed loudest. Pastor Jim looked into his water glass. Tess did not laugh. She looked at me with her fists on the table, and Melissa put a hand over hers. I stood inside my mother's arm in front of the room, in my good apron, and I heard, over the laughter, the sound of car doors in the parking lot. "This is where you came in." I stepped down off the riser while Mom moved into her thank yous, and Rachel intercepted me by the hallway to the restrooms, 2 glasses of wine deep and vibrating. She pulled me half around the corner, and it poured out of her in a whisper that kept breaking. "Evie, before tonight gets worse, I have to... I'm so sorry. I thought you should hear it from me." She'd assumed, like everyone, that I was jobless and about to be finished off, and guilt had picked her lock. What came out was 12 years in 90 seconds. The coffees. Every coffee. Your mom would call me Sunday nights and she wanted to know things. And it felt harmless. And then it didn't. And Grant. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Grant had helped her with a car loan 3 years ago, and one other time with rent. And after that, the questions had come with assignments attached. The promotion, the house, the salary. And then Rachel said the thing that rearranged my skeleton. Evie, your mom knows. About your promotions. The big one, years ago. The regional thing. I told her myself. I thought it would fix everything. I thought she'd finally be proud, and she went quiet, and then she said. Rachel's voice dropped to almost nothing. She said, if that's true, then what does that make me? And then she just kept introducing you the same way. She needed the story, Evie. She needed you to be the failure. The hallway tilted a degree and settled. 7 years. My mother had known for 7 years and had chosen the introduction over the information, every event, every time. Thank you for finally telling the truth, I said. My voice stayed level, which surprised us both. You're 12 years late. I stepped past